Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, it's the Metro. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham, and it's our Fall On Air fundraiser here at WDET, and that means we need your support, especially for the Metro and WDET, so you can give that gift right now at WDET.org/give.
That's right, Tia. And that gift is going to get us closer to our goal for this hour, which is $1,000. And we have a match on the table for $3,000. That's from our generous Leadership Circle members. And you can help us to meet our goal and join the Leadership Circle at the same time if you opt to give $100 a month. And that is a signal to the community that you believe in local journalism, that you believe in public radio, and that you believe in access to information. And because you listen to and appreciate the Metro, what you're listening to right now, this is the very best way to support us, to support this programming. Go to WDET.org, or you can use the WDET app, make a gift, and leave us a comment. Tell us why you choose to support WDET.
And I want to say thank you to Benjamin out of Clarkston. Thank you so much, Benjamin, for your donation. He says, this is the only station I listen to, and Benjamin, me too. This is the only station that's on my radio dial other than my own music. So if you want to keep WDET here, strong and clear with the HD signal, go ahead and give at WDET.org. You can use that WDET mobile app, and you can also give us a call, 800-959-9338. But really looking forward to some really strong conversations that Robin's going to have right now in this 10 o'clock hour. So during this fundraiser, we bring you the news and conversations that inform you, enrich your life, and connect you to community, and that's what Robin's about to do.
Thanks, Tia. Let's begin with a conversation about what justice looks like when traditional pathways are stripped away. Right now, the space for diversity, equity, and inclusion is shrinking. Federal funding is disappearing. Programs that once promised opportunity are being stripped away. And in some places, the very idea of equity, of racial equity, is being recast as a problem. In this moment, when so much of that ground is being lost, restorative practices feel more important. Now, restorative justice isn't the same as DEI. It doesn't live in a policy binder or a grant proposal. It lives in people, in circles where survivors and those who caused harm sit together, share their truths, and try to repair what's been broken. It's harder to measure, but also harder to erase because it's rooted in relationships. Angel McKissick has been carrying this work for years. She's a psychotherapist, a researcher, and the founder of the Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network. Today, she directs the Keith Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State Law, training Detroiters to bring these practices into schools, courtrooms, and neighborhoods. Her work is a reminder that justice can mean healing and accountability at the same time. And that's exactly why we're talking about it now. These are the kinds of voices WDET is committed to bringing you, and they remain free to all only because listeners step up to support. If you can, join us at WDET.org. And Angel, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Angel, DEI programs are being rolled back across the country, as I mentioned. Restorative justice is different, but it shares a commitment to fairness and to repair. Why does restorative practice feel so urgent in this moment?
Ooh, right. First, I should say I think it's important for folks who might not be familiar with the language to really clarify what restorative justice is and isn't. Sometimes, and lately as it's become a buzzword and is getting popular, it really has been co-opted by the legal system. So I think there is a popular misunderstanding that restorative justice is just, in the schools, for example, a replacement for suspension or something that gets added onto the legal process, which it does happen that way. But that's actually like an incorrect and often harmful implementation. Restorative justice requires a whole paradigm shift about how you understand people and the nature of harm. And it leads you naturally, once you've made that shift, to different pathways. So it's really, restorative justice is kind of the back end of like a paradigm shift, right? It's really hard to start at a less punitive, accountability, consent-based process if you don't buy into that from the beginning. So while it is sort of an add-on to some of these programs, how we are advocating for it is under a much broader project, which is, if you think about the legal system, right? The legal system typically puts two people against each other, an offender, a victim. Yeah. There's a burden of proof and evidence. And if you don't have enough evidence to prove your case, then there is no accountability, which the legal system also understands as punishment. Restorative justice, the scope is much bigger. So we don't just look at the two people. We look at all the communities behind and around them that were impacted by harm. We also center the people themselves at the core of like how we proceed. So, for example, we dignify and humanize everyone in the process. So we understand that even people who do harm very likely have been harmed. And also those positions of I'm the offender and I'm the victim are not fixed. I've been in many circles where they'll both say, listen, like I've been with young men, a gunshot victim who was the victim in that circle, but who says, look, if he didn't shoot me, I was going to shoot him. Like, I'm going to be for real. This was, a dog-eat-dog situation. So restorative justice can appreciate those nuances in the way that the legal system can't, right? That we understand it's complicated. There's often small little harms that lead to the big blow up that gets you in court or gets you a charge. So it's also not just trying to address harm at the back end, but it's also a practice and a culture shift for building community in the first place. So we're less likely to harm each other because we're in community with each other. But if we do harm each other, we already have a culture of like connection and relationship to return to address that harm. So the scope of restorative justice is much larger. If you had someone broke into your house on the block, the person whose house is broken into, that's the person that gets to go to court. But everybody on that block now feels unsafe. Who is there for them? What they are also part of the ripple of harm. So a restorative justice paradigm brings all of that in and says, actually, everyone here is implicated. And also the person who broke in is probably the grandson of somebody who lives down the street, who might be struggling with substance abuse. Like, what can we do? Who has the responsibility to make it right? And what can we do to reintegrate people? And sometimes people do need to be separate for a minute. But the goal is always to try to bring back folks into the fold. And that's a very different approach than the legal system, which says you've done harm. We need to extract you from your community, maybe indefinitely, to a system that might be even more violent than where you came from. So
restorative justice has the power to be transformative. Practitioners of restorative justice don't see this as an add-on. It is holistic. It is centered on asking why, asking why across many different spheres. You've been a psychotherapist, a researcher, and now an organizer and a practitioner of restorative justice. Angel, I'm wondering, how did those paths lead you here to be able to talk about restorative justice in the way that you can now, to understand it in the way that you do now? How did those paths shape the way that you understand justice?
I mean, it's like how, we don't have enough time, but like anytime you ask someone about this, it's like you can really take it back, especially if you are of certain groups in this country. I mean, we can go back to my mother's incarceration, because of being held of contempt of a custody order of not bringing kids back by 8:00. Right. And so many of us in the work have personal connections like this. We've seen it up close, that a system that is supposed to serve and protect is actually enacting violence and harm against communities themselves. But I went into psychology because I was interested in stories and motivations of people. So you can see that that's a natural sort of inroad into restorative justice. When I got to the Detroit Justice Center, I was exposed to restorative justice. And as a therapist, I specialized in group therapy and group process, but I never heard of restorative justice. There's no cross-pollination there. And when I was exposed to it, I thought, this is really familiar, but it's not called therapy, because it's not, but it does have therapeutic value. And it also, where psychology has a very narrow scope, restorative justice can encompass whole societies, right? So, that lens of justice was because I was at the Detroit Justice Center. And now at the Keith Center, my scope is much larger. It's democracy itself. And I think there's really interesting implications for restorative justice at scale. Restorative justice is concerned with community building and harm. There is immense amounts of harm that's happening right now as a result of the administration's policies. We just think about locally the cuts at Job Corps and Focus Hope. Kids are on the street as a result of those cuts to Job Corps. Families are not going to be able to go to work because they don't have childcare because of those Focus Hope programs that are cut. So, and the harm will continue to come down. And so it begs the question, who has the responsibility to make it right, and how same questions apply? And I think the focus that restorative justice has on community is as crucial as ever. The we all we got is a very real thing right now, because we are being abandoned by government policies. And more than abandoned, we're being actively harmed. And our economic and social plight is being devastated. And so it really is going to force us into communities to figure out, what are the systems of mutual aid? What are the systems of repair when we do harm each other, when we can't rely on the legal system? And communities like immigrant communities, undocumented communities, they've had to be thinking about that, because you can't go to the authorities if you're in a domestic violence situation, or, if somebody beats you up, you can't call the police. So many folks will now be in the position, because of a serious lack of mistrust, legitimate concerns about whether they'll be harmed again by law enforcement. People will be forced into alternative modes of being in community and accountability right now, more than we have in the contemporary moment.
Some words that I continue to hear you invoke here, it's safety, it's accountability, it's community. You and your network surveyed Detroiters about some of these things, specifically about safety and accountability and what they mean. What did you hear back, and how does that differ from the assumptions that our courts or policymakers usually make?
What I will say about the book that we put out that details that report is it's complicated. People are contradictory. They contradict themselves. You have some people in one moment say, the police harmed me. We had a participant who the police did a raid on her house, and it was the wrong house. Her and her children were held at gunpoint by the police. And then 2 years later, she went to work for the police.
Wow.
It's not as black and white and easy as we would like it to be. There are folks who didn't even categorize certain behaviors as harm because they were told to expect violence because of who they are or where they live. And when it happened to them, they just take it as, I guess this is what happens. And specifically, we had a trans woman, when she came into the community, other trans women told her, expect violence. Like, men are going to harm you. And when it did happen, because of that, it took her a long time to recognize, hey, this is harmful. I shouldn't be harmed like this. So what we learned was that folks struggled to even identify their own harm, which has real consequences about whether you seek help or, you even can understand that you have trauma, because you don't even understand that you've been, you can't even name it. That was a huge theme that came out. The other theme was, yes, we did have some people endorse the police, but as an organizer, I took that as we have more work to do as organizers. Not that, people just love police and prisons, but people can't ask for what they don't know is available. It's not available right now. And in a place where violence is a real, legitimate threat, you can't blame people for saying, yes, I want the police, or I want more police, because we've not built anything else for people. But in places like New York City, common justice program where they do restorative justice for serious harm, attempted murder, 90% of victims who are offered RJ, restorative justice, as an option, take it. So we have models across the country that when we offer people alternative pathways, they take it because most people are harmed by people they know. And they don't want those people to die in prison. Their husbands, their partners, their brothers, their sons, their sisters, they don't want them to go to prison for 30 years, but they want the harm to stop. And our system is just not set up to meet those kind of needs. So I'm very proud of that work because it does paint the real, nuanced, complicated picture because our situation is complicated. We're dealing with violence, but it's with people we love, and we don't have any other means of accountability besides police, and we're put in a tough situation. And as Black folks, we know if we call the police, we're also very likely to be harmed by them. So what it shows and what it outlines is that people are struggling with even identifying harm, and then when they do, they really don't know what to do besides call the police. So it's just, we need to build more, is the big takeaway.
And then adding to this complexity is doing this work in Detroit. Detroit is a city that has lived through redlining, through disinvestment, through over-policing. But also it is a city that has strong traditions of self-determination, of organizing. It's a city of movements. How does that history shape the way restorative practices take root here?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, when you say all of that, I also just think about Detroit as a really rich site for experimentation, yes, for self-determined organizing. And Detroit, and it's not inconsequential, and it has to be mentioned that Detroit is a majority Black city. That makes a difference. It's the reason why this is such a rich site of organizing and self-determined action. That means that Detroit is well positioned to model for the rest of the country what resistance and self-determination and like democratic renewal can be in this moment because we have such rich traditions to pull from. I mean, probably more famously, we have James and Grace Lee Boggs, but we also have many unsung heroes, groups like So Sad and others from the 80s and 90s that were organizing their streets. All the people in popular, these national media that would look at cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Detroit and say, why aren't people worried about Black on Black crime? We've been worried about it for decades. We've been organizing around violence in our communities for decades. But we've also been experimenting with democratic projects all the time. We have organizations that have pushed for grassroots democratic intervention into our municipal system. We have community benefits ordinance that was a grassroots effort. Proposal P was a grassroots effort. We have really, really strong lineage of organizing here that lives today, and I think is going to be the thing that helps carry Detroit through what is going to be really, really difficult times. But because of that tradition, because of where we come from as a city, I do feel energized by that prospect because of the resources that we have here. I also think it's an opportunity for us to experiment with radical forms of democracy. And by radical, I mean the root, radical comes from the Latin, the root. And democracy means people power. So radical democracy just means getting to the root of people power. And here in Detroit, we have such a wonderful social grassroots infrastructure where we can make that a reality in what will be some pretty challenging times.
I think a lot of listeners are hearing this right now, and this is the kind of hope that they need, but we know it's measured hope because restorative justice, for example, isn't right for every situation. Where do you see the limits, and how do you decide when it's not the right path?
Yeah, that's interesting. People always ask that question. And this is what I say. I am not the one that makes that determination. It's the people involved in instances of harm that tell us. Restorative justice can, if everyone is willing, it can be used in any situation because it's up to the people who are implicated in that harm to come together. So we have seen folks who have survivors of murdered children, the most egregious forms of harm. But if they decide that, yes, I want to do this, yes, I want to face the person, and the person who did the harm said, yes, I want to be accountable, then it's right for them. There are no limits. The only requirement is consent. If the folks are willing to consent, then it's right for them. And I think people would be surprised to hear what type of violence, people who have experienced violence, how they're willing to consent. We've had folks who have had children killed in DUIs, and parents come together because they both lost children. One lost a life and one lost another life to incarceration. And they were able to connect with each other on that shared loss. So there is no situation in which RJ cannot be applied. It's up to the people to make that choice. But we need to make it available to them. We don't currently have the infrastructure. If we have a case right now in Wayne County Court, which we have had in the past, of people who have come to me and said, my loved one was murdered. I don't want this person to go to jail. My brother went to jail. He would not want this. We don't have anything for them. We're kind of at the mercy of a prosecutor and a judge who don't understand sometimes, who don't trust it, who have lots of concerns about it. So even when we have people themselves, victims themselves advocating for this, we haven't built the infrastructure to support them. And we have folks at the Detroit Justice Center and other places are working on and trying to build that infrastructure.
We could talk for a long time about what this looks like, building this infrastructure in particular, but we are running out of time. And so of the many questions that I'd still love to ask you, Angel, the one that I'm going to close things out with is this. How do you protect restorative justice from being politicized or dismissed before it has a chance to grow, to prove itself, and to become this vision that is so broadly applicable as you have painted?
There's a few things. I think one, sort of taking it from the abstract, sometimes it's like, feels like some woo-woo dreamy idea. Restorative justice is quite rigorous. We've had people who actually say, send me to jail because they couldn't take having to face the person that they harmed. It was like too much for them, that they would rather go to jail. That's real accountability, is having to fully appreciate what you've done to someone and how they've been impacted, but also how you've been impacted. And so I think bringing it down from the sky down to the ground and making sure that people of all class and background, we have all been harmed or done harm. We have folks in rural communities who are struggling with substance use, who are now saying, we don't want, our 19-year-old son who might be struggling with opioid addiction to go to prison. They can see his humanity. That's an opportunity for us to say, yes, this is for you too. This is for anybody who wants to change how they see human beings who are in pain, who wants to better understand the motivations for violence. So I think helping people identify those places in their life, like if you could have had this, would you have taken it? And I've asked old ladies who were victims of sexual violence as teenagers, if this was available to you at the time where you could have sat across from this person, would you have? And they said, yes, I would have. So I think asking the right questions, really understanding and addressing like the real pain and grief that loved ones have, and not being preachy and like condescending to people, but to say there is another way, like where we can cultivate accountability that's going to be meaningful for everybody. But that is like a slow interpersonal work that we need to do. So this is a long game for sure. Yeah.
Compassionate curiosity, it sounds like, is really central to restorative justice.
Yes. Yes.
Angel McKissick, Director of the Keith Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State Law. Thank you so much for joining me on the Metro.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We we are fundraising this hour. Thank you so much for listening to the Metro and hearing one of the crucial conversations that we're able to bring to you because of your support. This hour, we have a goal of $1,000 and we have a $3,000 match from the Leadership Circle. Don't leave any of that money on the table. Give now because you appreciate hearing from voices like Angel McKissick's, someone who is putting into perspective and reimagining justice in Detroit and justice more broadly in our world, who's giving us different ways to think about the criminal justice system through compassionate curiosity. Make that gift right now at WDET.org. This is the Metro. Stay with us.